Welcome back to Speducation. I am your host, Brandon Reed, and if this is your first time to the channel, a special welcome to you. Well, it's a new week and we have a new lesson. And last week's lesson, we talked about processing, and we talked about some of the issues that are related with processing, especially for those individuals with learning disabilities. But we stopped short of talking about what are some strategies that we can use to help those students process information. Well, today, that's what we're going to be learning about. Today's lesson, what is it like to have a learning disability? Part 3, strategies for processing. So do you remember what some of the issues were with processing and how LD students have a difficult time processing? Well, if you forget, think of it this way. If you have a non-LD student and you have an LD student and they're asked the same question, the non-LD student will then process the answer. The LD student will have to process the question, think about it, process the answer, and then deliver it to the teacher. So the LD student is doing double the work that the non-LD student is doing. So when we're talking about processing, it really comes down to time. How do we give our students more time to process this? And what are some strategies on doing that? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today. So now that we know what the problem is and how to fix it, what are some ways that we could implement or include time into our lessons? Or how could we as a parent provide time for our child? Well, the best way to do this is that when you're asking a question to an LD student, okay, you need to give them time to process the question. So if I'm the teacher and I'm standing up and I'm doing my lecture and lessons and everything, and then I come over to a student and I ask them a question, I'm going to look them directly in the eye and I'm going to say, "Little Johnny, now I'm going to ask you a question. During the War of 1812, who was the president?" And by asking him the question directly and telling him, "Hey, I'm going to ask you this question," I'm letting him know that he needs to process an answer, okay? He's not going to be able to process an answer right then because he's got to process the question. But if I look at him directly and say, "Little Johnny, I want to ask you a question. During the War of 1812, who was the president?" And by doing that, I'm allowing the student time to process the question. And not only that, but I might throw in something like, "Take your time and think about that," okay? Letting him know that he's got time to process the question, it gives the student a little bit of, it alleviates stress, I guess you could say, because then the student doesn't feel like he has to answer a question right here and right now. So when a student is faced with that, it feels like, the class is moving a mile a minute, when in reality, it's not. So giving the student time and allowing him to process the question before he needs to answer, that goes a long way. But giving the student time is just one way. What about if you're in a class with about 20 or 30 other students and the teacher's spouting off questions here and there and here and there to this person, to that person, to this person, to that person, and then they come to you? Has that ever happened to you where they'll be asking questions and then out of the blue, they're like, "Brandon, can you tell me what was going on during the War of 1812? Or Brandon, can you tell me how to solve 2x plus 5 equals 10? Okay? It can throw you off. And for LD students, to them, the class is going a mile a minute. And so when the class is going a mile a minute and then the teacher asks you a question, you're so focused on what he said 5 minutes ago that you can't process the question that he just asked you. So what are some ways that you can overcome that? Well, there are a couple of different strategies, but one that works best is signals. Now, what do signals look like? Well, let's check out this clip.
So as a teacher, what do you do about that? There are some techniques you can use. Let me show you one very quickly. Stephanie's the LD child in the classroom. What I do is I take Stephanie aside sometime when no one else is around. Just Stephanie and myself. And I sit down and I say, "Stephanie, you're having trouble with my lectures, aren't you?" "Yes, I am, Mr. Lavoie. You talk so fast." "Well, as a matter of fact, Stephanie, I don't talk too fast, but it seems that way to you. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to make a little deal. Because I'm sure not only is it difficult for you to process, but you're also nervous that I'm going to call on you. Yeah, I'm so nervous you're going to call on me that I lose track of what you're saying and it makes it worse. Here's the deal we're going to make, Stephanie. I will never call on you unless I'm standing in front of your seat. So while I'm over here lecturing, you take all of your energy and you put it into concentrating on the lecture and understanding and processing the lecture, and don't worry, I won't call on you. So the next day I come into class and I'm standing over here, we're talking about the War of 1812, and I'm throwing questions at Maria and at Kit and at Jody and at Kara, and then I look over at Stephanie and I kind of move over in front of her desk and I say, and Stephanie, maybe you could tell us who the president was during the War of 1812. And she answers the question, I say thank you and move away. No one else knows that that went on.
So what did you see in the clip? You saw the teacher probably asked the student a question, okay, and he gave the student a signal. He met with the student before or after class, and he explained to the student what was going on and what the teacher had noticed. Then he gave the student a signal so that the student would know that when he's getting ready to be called on, he needs to look for this specific signal. By doing that, it alleviates some of the stress for the LD student, and it helps the student focus. That's why when I'm in the classroom, if I have a student that really is struggling and they're afraid to raise their hand, I'll usually give them some sort of index card. And then that way, if they're really struggling, they can turn the index card over. And on the other side is a red dot. And that's an indication to me, oh, little Johnny isn't quite getting this. So maybe I need to go over something. Or maybe I need to ask little Johnny, hey, little Johnny, was there anything that you needed more clarification on? And by doing that, I'm not necessarily signaling him out, even though I kind of am because I'm asking him a question, but I'm letting him know that I acknowledge that you're not understanding this. And by doing that, it lets the student know, okay, Mr. Reed gets me. He understands me. He knows that I'm not quite getting it. So that's one way. But what is another way? Well, another strategy that you can use is the ask and step away. Now, this is relatively new, and there are probably some teachers that have never heard of it. But what you do is you ask a question, and then you step away from the student. So if I were asking little Johnny a question, I might say, little Johnny, can you tell me who was the longest serving president in U.S. history? All right, think about that. And then I step away. Maybe I go back to the whiteboard and I wipe it down. Maybe I go to another student in the classroom and I give them a pencil. Maybe I go back to my desk and sit on my desk or lean on my desk and look back at little Johnny, okay? But by asking him a question, telling him to think about it, and then stepping away, I'm giving him space and I'm giving him time to process the question. Because believe it or not, it doesn't quite feel good when a teacher asks you a question and then they're standing there like this, or they're standing there like this, okay? It feels kind of intimidating. And even though the teacher may not necessarily be meaning to do that, that's how it's feeling to the student. So by asking the question and then just giving them some breathing room, it lets the student know, okay, I don't feel as overwhelmed and as stressed. And not only that, but it's building their confidence too, because it's letting the student know that it's okay to take your time to answer a question, because it may take you a little bit longer than your peers, but that's okay because the teacher's giving you some breathing room and allowing you time. Which brings us to the next thing. Why aren't learning disabled students risk takers? Well, there are a lot of reasons, but there's one main reason, and we're going to take a look at that in this clip.
The real reason you're not volunteering is this. And think about this. What did I say to you when you got an answer right? What did I say? Nothing. No reinforcement, no recognition, no reward. I never told anyone it was a good answer. I never responded positively to one response that I got. What did I say when you couldn't get an answer, when you couldn't think of something or you made a mistake? What did I say then? Had plenty to say then, didn't I? You see, what you've learned in 10 minutes is what the learning disabled child has learned in his school history, and that is this. You're sitting there thinking, why should I play with this guy? Why should I play this game? Because based on what I've seen, if I get the answer right, he's not going to say anything. And if I get it wrong, he's going to embarrass me. So why should I volunteer? You see what?
So hopefully that clip clarifies some things, because if you are a student, an LD student, you're probably not going to be a risk taker because you're afraid of getting answers wrong. And what I try to do is whenever I make a mistake in class, I own up to it. Okay. If you were to ask my wife, she would probably say he doesn't own up to any of his mistakes, which is slightly true. But in the classroom, I own up to them because I want my students to see that even people like me, the teacher, makes mistakes. And if they see me make a mistake, it means that I'm not upset about it. I made a mistake, I'm going to move on. And it gives them the confidence to say, you know what, Mr. Reed, he made a mistake, didn't bother him. Okay, I'll take a chance. All right. And by doing that and building up their confidence, they're going to be more likely to take part in the class. So we've covered a couple of things today. So let's do a quick review over everything that we've learned. So today we've learned a lot about different processing strategies. And the first one that we learned about was time, allowing the student to process the question before requiring an answer. And there are a couple of different strategies on how to give the student time. One of them is ask and step away. By asking and stepping away, you're giving the student breathing room and you're allowing them time to process the question so that they can formulate a response. Another thing is provide signals, okay? Oftentimes in class, students are so focused on the lecture itself that they don't even realize that a question has been asked. And so when they're asked a question, they're put on the spot and they're kind of thrown off. So by providing them signals, such as letting them know that when I stand in front of your desk, I'm going to ask you a question. Or if I come over and I tap your desk, that's an indication that I'm going to ask you a question. Okay, by providing those signals, it allows the student more time to prepare, to process the question, formulate a response, and then answer it. Now, processing issues is just one hurdle for a lot of learning disabled students. But what are some of the other hurdles that they face? Well, we're actually going to be learning about some of those next week. So let's take a look at next week's lesson. Next week's lesson is Part 4, Visual Perception. If you liked what you saw, please click the like button. And if you want updates on future videos, feel free to click the subscribe button and ring the bell for updates on future videos. And as always, if you learned anything new or you found something really interesting, or you even have a question, a follow-up question to today's lesson, and you want to ask it, please feel free to comment in the comments section, and I'd be more than happy to answer the question or respond to your comment. And until next time, class dismissed.